Oh, sweetie. You know what I love about winter? It's so nice. You get to sit inside on a cold, grey day. You get to enjoy the music, just chill winter music. And you made me a delicious cup of Brownian motion generator. So there's just nothing that could spoil a day like today. It's just perfect. Unless work called. Yes. Yeah.
Hey, Kate.
Hi.
I'm sorry to bother you. But one of our viewers, David Hastings, mentioned that there's a paper that's come out from the Texas Public Policy Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you've heard of them. I haven't, to be honest. Anyway, some of the maths in it, it looks wrong.
I'm sure it's fine. I'm just popping you on speaker for a second. Give me a moment. Okay. So the thing with this collection of words that I'm going to discuss today is that, well, it's going to be hard for me because it's founded on such an utterly ridiculous fallacy that it's hard to even begin to express how incredibly ludicrous it is. So before we get going, bear in mind that in 2021, the International Monetary Fund calculated that fossil fuels received 5.9 trillion, that's trillion as in with a T, dollars in subsidies. Not profits. This is just money we gave them for, I don't know, being oil companies. That's $11 million every minute in subsidies, or $183,330 and 33.3 reoccurring cents every single second of every minute of every single day. In just the time it's taken me to read those sentences, those subsidies could have purchased a nice fancy house in the countryside for every one of the team here at the channel, and probably given them a nice retirement account too. Even Nikki, and she doesn't pay herself most of the time. And yet, this starts with an outlandish claim, a claim that underpins all of their calculations. And that claim is, are you ready? That quote, "When we pay for a gallon of gasoline, we are paying for the entire infrastructure to refine, transport and market that gasoline." End quote. Let me just remind you that the IMF says that China, the United States, Russia, India and Japan account for 2/3 of fossil fuel subsidies globally. Subsidies that lead to overconsumption of fossil fuels. So basically, we could stop this video here because everything foundational in this paper is wrong. Except, well, it's that time of year, and there's a significant chance that your unfavourite family member from a few states over will be spending some quality time with you over the holidays, and statistically speaking, if you're watching this, you're probably more likely to either drive an electric car or want to drive an electric car than they are, and they will have heard from their favourite putrid quagmire of smeg passing itself off as news that EV's bad, gas cars good. So once more into the breach, dear friends. This study has ignored not just the roughly 8% of fossil fuel subsidies that are direct, explicit subsidies, but also the 92% of implicit fossil fuel subsidies in the form of tax breaks and unpaid costs for healthcare and environmental damage. Now, they have, to be sure, included in their calculations subsidies for EVs, so it's not that they don't know about subsidies. They just don't want to talk about fossil fuel ones, or things like the chicken tax and the US laws around vehicle emissions that encourage manufacturing and importing inefficient larger SUVs and pickups, and tax and discourage production of smaller, more efficient vehicles, including small, cheap EVs from Europe. This isn't just a finger on the scale of their calculations, it's an entire exoplanet removed from the gasoline side of the calculation while simultaneously dumping another on the EV side. And it makes everything after that nonsensical. So I can't really go through the calculations and debunk them because they're foundationally wrong. They got the math wrong at the first step, and then everything, literally everything after that is wrong too. It's just absurd. And I know there'll be a bunch of ideologues in the comments section saying, see, she couldn't debunk it. But I just did. There's no calculation to go through because the whole thing is based on a wrong concept from the get-go. It's roughly the equivalent of me saying, I'm going to tally the cost of my books, but I'm going to exclude any that are printed on paper. Frankly, I might just as well grab my Sinclair Scientific and throw it in a cage with some monkeys and once they'd done smashing it, count the number of pieces it ended up in. That would be as accurate as this steaming pile of amoeboid Zingatalarian excretion. It's not entirely surprising though, considering that the Texas Public Policy Foundation receives a bunch of cash from Koch Industries and from Exxon. It's just possible they might have a little bit of a bias.
I am shocked! Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
But despite the fact that I quite like the idea of feeding this into a shredder and having neural remodeling so I forget that I had the misfortune of seeing it,
here at Lacuna we have perfected a safe, effective technique for the focused erasure of troubling memories.
Apparently people believe this absolute dross and some media outlets report it uncritically. So let's at least go a little further because there are some other interesting tidbits in here which signal how the fossil fuel lobby is going to misrepresent information to fight tooth and nail for their right to destroy the planet and kill us all. So as I mentioned, this study basically regards anything that might encourage EV adoption as a subsidy and any cash that cuts the cost of gasoline or diesel or fossil fuels generally as not worth considering. But it also mixes in a heady dose of... hang on. Yes, we are going to discuss politics again, because yes, politics affects everything in your life, from whether folks like me can get healthcare, to how much rat poop you have in your hot dog, to whether paint contains toxic lead, to how we manage pollution. So if you don't want to hear about that, skip on using the chapter marks below. Okay, now we've got rid of those folks, which honestly is probably for the best. Not that I like politics, it's just important. Oh, and we should note here that I am neither a historian nor a lawyer, and we're going to be pretty rough and ready to get through this nice and quick. So feel free to fill our comment section with a treatise on the many and specific ways I've got the history wrong, or my approximation is too approximate for your tastes. So, slopping all around this paper in a messy, frankly tacky and unpleasant way is a lot of veiled discussion of the non-delegation doctrine. It's not really explicitly stated, it's just there, oleaginous and blubbery under the surface. It's in the phrasing and in the way that it defines certain elements, like the gall of the EPA regulating pollution and the abject horror of an agency enacting and enforcing the CAFE standards. And worse, inexcusably, infinitely worse, they expect automakers to get better to make vehicles less polluting as technology improves. The absolute impertinence of this interference in the perfection of the free market. So the non-delegation of powers concept stems from Section 1 of the US Constitution, which indicates that the Congress of the United States is vested with all legislative powers. Now, in the late 20s, in J.W. Hampton Jr. and Co. versus the United States, the Supreme Court ruled that the delegation of authority to agencies like, say, the Food and Drug Administration, was an implied power given by the Constitution and was constitutional as long as Congress provided a, quote, intelligible principle to guide the executive branch. On the other hand, non-delegationists point to John Locke's writing in 1690, who indicated that only the legislative branch could make laws and could not transfer the authority to do so. Now, laying aside the founders were clear that the Constitution should be a living document for the US to change as the world shifted, not something frozen in amber for us to sit and gawk at, and of course that modern interpretations of language can differ from the original meaning, this of course leads to a whole debate about what the difference between a law and a rule is, and all sorts of philosophical and political debate that we're not going to get into. But it is important to understand that the authors of this thing are approaching the idea of regulation from the concept that the very presence of regulation is an unacceptable burden on industry, and that automakers and the fossil fuel industry should just be allowed to go about doing whatever they fancy. So while we may understand that CAFE standards are getting stricter because, well, climate change and also increasing evidence about just how harmful to human and environmental health fossil burners are, this paper uses a lot of rhetorical nonsense, like stating that a hidden cost of EVs, as in a cost that's been passed from EV purchasers to gasoline car purchasers, and indeed to the rest of society, is that CAFE standards have been made increasingly stringent, quote, in order to make ICE vehicles more expensive and drive EV adoption. You know it's rubbish, I know it's rubbish, and the authors almost certainly know it's rubbish, don't you, Brett and Jason? If not, they certainly should. We know that CAFE standards have got stricter as we desperately try to improve air quality and prevent climate change from being an unmitigated disaster. And if we're going to talk about costs passed from one side to another, let's talk about the mortality and morbidity from fossil fuel vehicles. Let's talk about cleaning up the cost of endless oil spills. Let's maybe talk about crop failures and extreme weather events, by which I mean floods and fires and droughts that we're already seeing from climate change. I'm sure that must be in here. Nope, they don't seem to be in here at all. And then I think we should talk about one other general thing, and that is the notion that things could be better, which seems antithetical and frankly heretical to the authors of this study. I briefly mentioned before their deep upset that CAFE standards require that cars should get better over time. This causes them to adopt roughly the same calm and peaceful nature as a scholastic armor fiend of Striterax accused of cheating at tridimensional chess. The authors complain that after many years of relative stability, the Obama administration began to ratchet up the CAFE standards. I don't know why I do this in a posh English accent, I can't help it. Obviously, using the pejorative word ratchet in there to get you in the right mindset. Another way of saying this would be that the government required that automakers actually try and produce marginally more efficient vehicles, just like they were managing for the whole rest of the world, saving purchasers money as they drove and helping to reduce pollution, and so also saving taxpayers money, because you know what, when people die or are sick because of air pollution, that's actually expensive. In fact, let's just take a moment, because by the early thousands, the US was an appalling laggard in the fuel economy standards. Just look at the comparison between the EU or China and the US. It's hilariously bad. Or it would be if it wasn't so upsetting. Anyhow, because automakers had basically said not bothered when it came to improving fuel economy in the US, the CAFE standards, when they kicked in, required a fairly rapid improvement. You know, to catch up with the same stuff those self-same automakers were making and selling for everyone not in North America. This distressing situation also deeply upsets the authors of this white paper. So much so that I expect when it happened they spent several days crying in bed cuddling their Fred Phelps plushies. They first point out that things weren't improving, then complain that automakers were forced to improve efficiency faster than, quote, the typical improvement rate for ICE vehicle engines. So, improving faster than not improving at all? That's the problem? I see. And I do feel I ought to give a shout out to their graphic designer, because there's this cutesy little image showing what it takes to power an EV versus a gas car. Only, well, it's daring given that they're based in Texas to suggest you should use natural gas to power the power station because, you know, Texas. It's now synonymous with fossil fuel power cuts. Texas's generation is basically a cautionary tale called lack of regulation is a disaster area. But just a small point here, Texas generated just under 1/2 as much power from renewables as it did from natural gas. So I think it's rather a disingenuous image. And since quite a lot of EV drivers are quite into renewables, I think we should probably fix that bit of the graphic. Oh, and while we're at it, let's tack on some of the things they missed out. So let's pop in increased mortality. Oh, and increased morbidity. Then, as we mentioned, there's pollution. Oh, and of course, endless wars across the world for control of fossil fuel resources. In 2023, the Department of Defense had a $1.52 trillion budget distributed among its 6 subcomponents. That would buy quite a lot of EVs. Oh, and of course, there's the cost of climate change. You know, moving entire populations inland thanks to sea level rise, not to mention food instability, novel diseases. We wouldn't want to suddenly find ourselves contending with a new virus because of shifting animal habitats. Like, say, mosquitoes that used to not be able to live in Florida now thriving and surviving in Florida. Well, at least something is. At the end of the day, this is 100% fact-free right-wing fantasy. It's impossible to pick it apart to debunk because the whole thing is nonsense. It's a bauble of absurdity on a Christmas tree of hogwash. I could just as much close my eyes and tap random numbers into my calculator and then claim that the average EV costs 0.1 cents per owner mile because of the costs offloaded onto EV consumers by the fossil fuel industry. Otherwise, your calculations are skewed, you know? And that would probably be closer than any of the numbers in this paper. I hope you've enjoyed my righteous anger today. I hope that you'll join us next time we do a bit of FUD busting. Till next time. Thanks for joining me today, and if you've got thoughts, make sure you leave them below in our Discord chat room, or you can reach out to us on Mastodon. Thanks to the amazing list of people scrolling by on your screen right now. They are some of the more than 1,500 people who help fund this channel through Patreon and YouTube, covering our bills, paying our team, and making sure we can be 100% independent. A huge welcome to our newest supporters, Patreon user 1124, Gordon Smith, Alan Williams, Tim Nicholas, Jalia Hallett, and Nathan Plowman. If you'd like to join them and see your name listed here, just follow the links below. There's a range of different tiers you can sign up to for as little as $1 a month, or if you pay yearly, just under $11 a year. If you'd like to support us with a one-off donation, you'll find links below to make Ko-fi and Bitcoin donations, and we even have an old-fashioned PO box that you can reach us at. Address is down below. And if you're in need of some swag, you'll find our swag store also in the down below. We've got some great content coming up, so make sure you're subscribed on PeerTube or YouTube, and we'll see you soon. We make new videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday and Sunday. If you want more, the mighty algorithm thinks you'll like this video, but we think this one is also well worth a look. See you soon, and as always, keep evolving!